Fine. Are we all sitting comfortably? Right. So I'm going to go straight into a screen share so that you can see the. There it is. Share. And we'll pull this up as full screen. So, good evening to the people I already know who've already had me in their house doing installation. It's a delight and a surprise that you've come back for yet more of me droning on about the extreme advantages of insulating your house. So, key messages for tonight. These are the things I want you to have in mind and take away. It's urgently needed. There are so many drivers, there are so many reasons why we've really got to get on with insulating our houses, in fact, all buildings. It's technically possible. We've got all the technology, we've had it for decades, and it's entirely doable. One of the biggest barriers, though, is the skills shortage. And this is both in terms of new entrants to the construction industry, but also a huge retraining program is needed for existing tradespeople. And part of that challenge is that how do you teach old dogs new tricks? Well, I think you just need a bigger bone, and you've got to get them excited about a new market with high spec. But there's a lot of benefits for doing it, and I'm going to, in a later slide, I'm going to describe why it's such a really good reason for doing this work. But we're going to need some government policy change because we need a lot of money. We also need much higher design targets and build quality. But we can start with our own houses and highlight the benefits to our friends, and of course tell our local councillors and our MPs. So, what's possible? This is a house of a very good friend of mine in Otley, and the photo show here is this icy stripe down the outside of his house. Now, in fact, the whole street was covered in hoarfrost. It's a few years ago. Very pretty it was too. And after a few days, this hoarfrost on the outside of the majority of houses melted, but it didn't on Rod's house because it wasn't leaking heat, and that was because it insulated it. And this is a really dramatic indicator that all the other houses are leaking heat. So Rod's house is amazing. So it's warm and comfy all the year round, and he's got a wood burning stove, but he hardly uses it. You can go in his house and the heating hasn't been on for days and it's still warm. The lighting is all ultra bright LED run off a 12-volt leisure battery and charged from a very small solar panel out the back of his house. The gas was turned off 20 years ago, and his mains electricity bill for the whole of 1 year that he showed me was about £40. Now, I'm really excited by the possibility that a 100-year-old terrace house can be made to be this self-sufficient. If we could do that with the majority of houses, that would make a huge difference. My journey to here, I started a community group in Otley, 2008. Then I went on to make a insulation company, was part of writing the home insulation manual. I work with Leeds Beckett University. This is me and Chris Gorse reviewing some plans of a house that we're doing monitoring in. I do talks in various places. This was at the Harrogate Home Building and Renovation Show. I'm giving some advice at an earthship down in the south of England. Last year, I was actually an expert witness to the Leeds Citizens Jury, where I was talking about wide-scale community-led insulation schemes in Leeds. And during the lockdown, I've given some of my time to a food delivery charity, so driving that van around Yorkshire. What's the climate doing? Well, September this year was the hottest ever. Atmospheric carbon is doing this, and the temperature is doing that. This red bar is the same time scale as this graph, so you can see the two are in line. Here's the source of that information. Extreme weather events are happening more frequently. We'll all be very aware of the dreadful fires in America. And in fact, this year in the Gulf of Mexico was the first time ever there's been two hurricanes at the same time. and that's quite significant and a real indicator of the warming waters creating all that energy. We don't have to go far though to see huge effects. English Lake District, Saddleworth Moor, you'll remember this being on fire. And one thing that wasn't publicised very much was last year, the Amsterdam tornado.
Kijk, hij raakt de grond bijna. Hij raakt bijna de grond. Kijk, hij raakt, kijk, daar gaat hij. Jezus, kijk dan, daar is een tornadootje. Moet je zien? What the fuck? Ja, een tornado.
Holy shit!
What the fuck?
Nee!
Ja.
Oh, dat ze naar binnen fietsen! Oh! Oh nee! Oh! Wat erg!
What the fuck? Wat heb ik?
Now, I don't know about you, but that's getting a bit close. I always thought tornadoes happened in Texas or somewhere, but Amsterdam really isn't very far away. One of the other huge drivers for me to be part of this work is the fuel poverty in the UK, which I think is a criminal effect of poor policies. And in fact, even with the most recently massaged figures, 2.5 million households in the UK are living in a place where they have to choose between heating or eating. That's actually 10.3 of the whole population. 18% in older houses, 21% in private rented properties, and that's utterly staggering, criminal, 23% of lone parents with children. Last week I was giving this talk, or a similar one, to a community group in the Scottish borders. So I looked up the figures in Scotland, and I was horrified to find the lowest fuel poverty there is in Edinburgh, and the highest is nearly 60%. That's really very bad. So if we didn't need any more positive proof that global warming is happening, we only have to look at certain items of clothing, which tells its own story. So what can be achieved? I've just drawn a very simple bar graph here. The one on the left, the average figure, about 15,000 kilowatt hours combined gas and electricity for the average house. At this end down here, the passive house is about a tenth that, 1,500 kilowatt hours a year. A new build is still pretty bad. They're just not meeting the standards. Enefit is a kind of a diluted passive house version, but very expensive because all the components have to have certificates. So super installation, a kind of a term where we're going well beyond building regs, but really making a big effort to improve airtightness and putting insulation on our external surfaces is a good target, I feel. So why is it a good idea? Well, the whole thing would create tens of thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands. It would certainly stimulate the manufacturing industry and the supply chain. The health and well-being of millions of people would be affected, and of course that reduces the burden on our precious NHS. It builds community involvement. Once you've got people working together, they all start to pull their socks up, and of course if they're not paying huge fuel bills, they are putting money in the local economy. Absolutely, it would reduce carbon emissions, and in fact it would improve UK's fuel security because we wouldn't have to import as much gas and electricity. Now, hang on, if it's such a good thing, if there are so many co-benefits, why is it not one of the biggest national infrastructure priorities that we have? And you could choose your own capital project that we could do without to give us insulation for the whole of Britain. Now, government policy we need to change. We need something like £200 billion to fix all of this, which sounds like a lot of money, but they seem to find it. If one of their mates has got an airline who's going broke or a bank is about to crash, they just seem to print it. So writetothem.com is an easy way to send a message to your local councillor or your local MP. Heat loss from a building, there's several ways that it comes out. Through the floor is often a forgotten one. Typical.
Oh, yeah.
Could we have people turning off their microphones, perhaps? Thank you. With a stone-built property, this figure through the walls would be about 45%. Okay, I'm going to explain U values, and the reason I want to do this is because every discussion about what you have now and what you could have is based on this simple number. It's a term which describes the amount of heat which is flowing through a surface. It applies to any surface. So let's just take this 1 square meter of wall. We're going to say it's got a U value of 5. There's a temperature difference of 1 degree C inside to outside. That 5 means that 5 watts of energy is permanently flowing through that 1 square meter. If we go up to 20 degrees C, a more typical room temperature, then we're now up to 100 watts through that 1 square meter. If we take a more typical area of an external wall, let's say it's 10 square meters, again with room temperature, we're now up to 1,000 watts of energy, 1 kilowatt. Now, there will be losses through the other surfaces in that room, the floor, the party walls, and the ceiling. But whilst we're sitting in this room, we have to pour 1,000 watts of energy into that room, or else that temperature will fall. And I bet you've all been in houses where you can get the room warm, but the moment you turn the heat off, the temperature plummets. So a fire like this, I imagine there are people on the call who can remember these. I grew up with this kind of heater in the corner of the room trying to warm it up. Okay, well, let's put some insulation on the wall. Let's try 100 millimeters of Kingspan, often called PIR. The U value would drop to 0.25, and that means there'd only be 0.25 watts flowing through that surface. For the 20 degrees C room temperature case, we're now up to only 5 watts, and for the larger wall here at room temperature, we're up to only 50 watts. Now 50 watts, a human being gives off about 50 watts when they're sitting still, or 3 cats. So you could say we either need more insulation or more cats. Now, this kind of fire, I mean, I can't believe anybody still uses this kind of fire. Well, here's the funny thing. In a newspaper, only a couple of years ago, there was this picture of the Queen meeting some dignitaries. What is she heating her room with, surrounded by millions of pounds worth of paintings? Well, it's a fire like that. Okay, so let's give you a framework of, this is important because this is how we describe what's possible in each house. Stone built house, somewhere between 4 and 10, brick built 1.5 to 5. The golden standard here is the U value, sorry, the U value of 0.1. If we can get down towards that, then your house is going to self-heat. What builders would typically do is put cavity wall insulation in, which is pretty bad, or just 50 millimeters of PIR, Kingspan, which is also not close to our ambitious target. 200 millimeters of mineral wool or polystyrene or 100 millimeters of Kingspan gives us a U value in this kind of area. Or if you want to get more ambitious, then PIR at 150 millimeters comes to here. The only other material that can challenge Kingspan as a rigid board insulant is aerogel, but it's 10 times the price, so it's not really available as a domestic product. Single glaze window is 5, double glaze window with air 2.6 to 2.9, argon filled double glaze is twice as good, argon filled triple glaze twice as good again. Now some of you will perhaps have leaded lights in your rooms or above the door, but the lead is so conductive that a typical stained glass window, leaded light window, has got a U value of over 100. So it's practically thermally transparent, heat just blowing out into LS6. And for comparison, here are some figures for metals, which are wonderfully conductive. What can be done? Well, this is a manual that I worked on with Leader, and Matthew is with us today from Leader, and he helped with this. And this is I'll let some of these pages slide on as I'm talking about this. This is a guidance manual of how to retrofit particular aspects of your home. And this is available for each of you to download. It's as a PDF. It's available for anybody to download. I'll give you the link. And this gives you some of the ideas about what you can do in particular places. These are some of the housing associations and housing co-ops that I've worked with in Leeds, and they're using this manual pretty much on a daily basis. This is worth having a look at. It's a blog by a friend of mine, insulatingmyhouse.wordpress.com. I'll leave it to your imagination what the blog is about. And here's a link for the Super Installation Guidance Manual. If you just drop me an email, I'll send you a link to download it. Okay, so how much is enough insulation? This is always a good question. Is anything better than nothing? Well, no. If it's cold and you're not wearing enough, you're going to be cold. So what we need is, this is Molly Hughes, who's the first British woman to climb Everest by 2 different routes. And here she is wearing sufficient insulation to keep her warm. And that's the measure. That's how you decide how much is enough. So here's a case study of a house in Armley I did a couple of years ago. This is the room I was working in, upstairs bedroom. It's actually got 3 external walls on it, the gable wall around the corner. Now, this is some of the Kingspan. I'm just shaping it here, and it's actually going into this sloping part of the ceiling, which apparently in Cornwall they have the wonderful word skeeling, which I'm now trying to bring into every conversation. Here's a typical view of that room, and we've insulated the outside surface, this wall and these sloping sections with 150 millimeters of Kingspan, and this has just been a transformational change to the room. Now, it was so cold that even with the heating full on, they had this hot air heating system. They couldn't use it. They wanted to use it as their main bedroom, but they couldn't use it. And in fact, the work I did blocked up the hot air vent on purpose. Don't worry, I did notice it was there, but it just happened to be where I wanted to put some insulation. And then before they put a central heating radiator in, which was the plan, they made it their main bedroom. And they found that just with 2 people in there and the bedside lights on, the room stayed at a comfortable temperature. In fact, they told me it's now the warmest room in the house. Insulation works. Now, air tightness is crucial. I did have a video to show you here, but I'm not going to play that tonight. This is the floor joist going into the inner leaf of the outer wall. And what's not understood well is that they're sitting in loose sockets here, and there's always cold air blowing in around them. And this tissue paper that I had taped onto the wall was blowing backwards and forwards because of the airflow coming in. And it's really important to deal with this air tightness and this cold air blowing into the center of the house to get a warm home. Okay, underfloor insulation project. This is working under a house in, I can't remember, Headingley. There we are, it's in Headingley. And you've got to have all the gear on, of course, to do this kind of work. What we're doing here is one of the jobs is to seal the gaps between all of the floorboards. There's a lot of air leaks between the boards as they shrink over time, and also around the edges. So bathroom silicone sealant is how we do that. Here's some expanding foam going in around the edges of the room. You find some treasure whilst you're down under these properties. Here's a remarkable old newspaper that we found. I think there were adverts for cars for £300 brand new or something like this. Continue. The other thing you find under floors is meter after meter of bare copper pipe, and this is hemorrhaging heat into the local area. Copper is incredibly conductive, so the outside temperature of these pipes will be exactly the same as the hot water inside them, and that heat is being wasted. Quite often you'll find that where the pipes are going through the floorboards, the people without training have left huge holes, and this is another source of cold air blowing into the house from under the floor. Of course, what we've really got to do is to put a very thick layer of insulation around the pipework to keep the heat in. And of course, one of the advantages of this means that the hot water that you've created in your boiler actually gets delivered to the radiators in your room at about the same temperature that it started. So of course your rooms are going to heat up quicker as well. This is a detail showing the silicone on the joints. At the edge of the wall here, I've put some plastic mesh, and I'm going to fill this entire space behind this joist with expanding foam, and that's going to give me both air tightness and insulation. These metal hangers here that you see is part of a suspension system I create, which allows me to put 2 layers of mineral wool below the floor, one between the joist and one below it at right angles. And you can get down to some very low U values by doing that. So we end up with a team of people down here. You measure the insulation out, and then you fit it between the joists, and appropriate PPE is necessary for this. This is actually a powered ventilator. So here's a community insulation project. I've repurposed the term housewarming party to describe how people can come together and work on each other's homes. And I run workshops in people's homes to get the job done. This is a house in York. It's actually one of the founders of York Community Energy. We're going to be working in this downstairs room down here. What we found when the carpet was lifted was that huge gaps in the floorboards and around the edges where lots of cold air blowing in. So we had to lift the floorboards, take out all the nails, either with crowbars and so on, or angle grinders. Here's the team once we've taken all the floorboards out and cleaned all the rubble out from below it. And then once we build this lattice work, this matrix of timber and so on, we feed the mineral wool in to create the 2 layers. So this shows the first layer underneath the joist, and this is the second layer going between the joists. And then finally, we've got the new floor fitted. Now, what this gave us was the old U value of 3.3 down to a new U value of about 0.1. So you can see the heat loss has reduced to about 5% of what it was, and with no drafts. So how's it done? Well, this is a house in Bingley. First of all, we'd strip the plaster from the walls, we'd apply insulation onto the walls, and then plasterboard it and skim it. And you can see our clever plasterer here has recreated the curves around the corners. Cornice and skirting is a real challenge, but there's companies that I work with that can recreate any molding and reinstate it. In fact, on this photo here, this is original and this is the new. So it's actually, and this is the insulated wall. So you can see it can retain the look and feel. Similarly, actually with skirting boards, this is a design you can't buy anymore. So I gave a sample to this other company I work with. They created a cutter and we could run off as much length as we needed to recreate the look of the room. And there's the room when it's finished with the 2 urchins now on this much wider window ledge, which has become kind of a window seat, bit of a feature. So appliances, here's before Tony reminds me, I am conscious that I'm coming to the end of the time. This is an experiment I did with my fridge. Fridges are cold to the touch, and that's because the insulation isn't sufficient on the door and the walls. So what I did was to insulate my fridge, and I did a before and after set of measurements of how much energy it used, very accurate meter. I did it over 2 weeks and several times a day, and with this insulation on, it used half the amount of energy. In fact, overnight, when I wasn't opening the door, it didn't use any energy. So one thing we can consider doing is actually just using plastic trays to store our food in the fridge, and therefore all the cold air won't come falling out. Radiator foil, definitely a good idea. LED light bulbs come in all shapes and sizes. Kettle, I like this one. It's got a reservoir. You just put as much as you need to boil. And this one I particularly like. You can actually choose the temperature at which it clicks off. The future is already here. you can get wirelessly controlled radiator valves, which allows you to zone your house by radiator. We can have curtains that are automatically open and closing. I mean, this is 1970s technology. And I really like the idea that by using occupancy detection, motion sensing, we could, as somebody walks in a room, open the curtains and put the heating up. So in other words, we could keep the curtains shut during the day and the heating on low until somebody's actually using the room. Ventilation, we could open the window. That actually works rather well once you've insulated the walls. Trickle vents are really important. Whole house mechanical ventilation. This is where you've got a very sealed exterior envelope and you're extracting moist, stale air from kitchens and bathrooms and putting fresh, warmed air into living spaces. But it's very hard to do as a retrofit. So what you can do is an individual room mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, and they work very well. Finally, final slide. It is my intention to go up a gear from Sure Insulation to create the company Sure Zero Carbon. And my intention is to do all of this, whole house plans, retrofit coordination. There's some new standards coming out, community workshops, performance monitoring and training. And I'm inviting people to come and join me in this venture. So if you know somebody who wants to come and be part of this, there we go, time up. Thank you. So I'm interested to talk to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Andy. That was really, really interesting and fascinating and full of fantastic, helpful tips through to complete overview of what's needed. I'm sure people have got lots of questions or comments or thoughts. Welcome to a few people who joined us just after the start. But particularly welcome back to Matthew, who's, I think, stolen his Wi-Fi connection from the neighbours and has now managed to join us. So I'm going to suggest we go straight on to the second talk and note down your questions, or you could even put them in chat and Andy can monitor them as we go through. So if you'd like to stay on mute and pin your ears back, Matthew and Andy sort of complement each other a bit like fish and chips, really, in some ways, because like, what's the point of insulating everything if your heating system's crap? And what's the point of improving your heating system if your insulation's crap? So Matthew is part of Zero Carbon Headingley, as many of you know, but is also retired consultant engineer, worked at Leeds Environmental Design Associates, and has 3 decades experience, at least, in designing heating systems. So over to you, Matthew, and just make sure you're co-host. You came back and then you can share your screen. There you go. And you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Can we see that?
Yep.
Great. So I was just going to run through the various options that we've got for housing and look at possible other options that are coming up and solutions. Because we're talking about urban housing in Headingley, I can't really be talking about things like the biomass boilers and methane generation from agricultural manure and things like that. So just to look at what's happening at the moment, new housing practice is still installing gas boilers as a sort of a default option. Better insulated houses are getting away with also with electric panel heaters. At some point, quite soon, we need to be stopping to use fossil fuels, including natural gas and oil, At the moment, there's sort of 22 million gas boilers, I think at least, installed in people's houses across the country. We're still replacing gas boilers. So over 1 million gas boilers were installed in 2019. Somehow we need to get rid of about 20 million boilers over the next 10 years. So that's quite a big issue to think about. So I think Andy's obviously said this, and Tony also mentioned the obvious fact that if you're looking at a new heating system, if you can insulate and do draft proofing first, you're obviously going to reduce the load on the heating system, you're going to reduce the size of the heating system, and also reduce the amount of energy that you need to use. But even in a really well insulated house, refurbished house, there's still going to be some heating required. And also you're still going to be using the same amount of hot water, probably. So we have to find low carbon ways of dealing with that. For a really well insulated house, electric heating is one option. The advantages really of electric heating are probably one that you can heat up a room quite quickly with an electric heater. It heats up very fast. It's also very controllable in the sense that you can set quite accurate thermostats onto them. Now, people are selling electric boilers and also selling possibly electric underfloor heating, neither of which really provide those advantages of electric heating. What they do provide, unfortunately, is the expense of electricity over gas. So you end up spending at least 4 times as much on your fuel bills. And okay, you can buy your electricity from a renewable supplier and feel okay about it. But we have to think about how much electrical energy we produce, because whilst we're doing quite well in reducing national carbon emissions at the moment, mainly through wind generation, some solar generation, if we started converting all our houses to just straightforward electric heating, and we all buy electric cars, then we're going to make sort of that basically overload the electricity system to a degree where getting back to zero carbon is going to be that much harder. So it'd be nice to look at more efficient types of heating system than just having straightforward convector panels and radiators. And I think one reason why I put this here is that you often see adverts in newspapers and online of super efficient electric panel heaters or radiant panel heaters and things like that. And in a sense that, I mean, whilst people make exaggerated claims about these, all electric heating basically transfers the electricity into 100% efficiency. And they can't do it at 110 or 200% efficiency, because that just doesn't work. So what are the other options? Well, one of the main options that is going to be likely to be used for a lot of domestic housing, especially in the cities, are the air source heat pumps. Now, I won't try and sort of do the thermodynamics exactly how they work, but basically they can extract low-grade heat from the outside air and basically sort of pump that up to a higher temperature for use in central heating systems. So you can get, in a well-designed system, you can get sort of up to 4 kilowatts of heat for every kilowatt of electricity that you use. There is a subsidy available from a scheme called the Renewable Heat Incentive, which is still running, which gives you a certain amount of money every year for 7 years after you've installed the heat pump, based on how much energy you're actually using. That helps pay for it. Now, what was interesting today was that the Climate Change Committee published their 6th carbon report. And in presenting that this morning, the chief executive of the committee, Chris starts. He said, to quote, that heat pumps are going to be the most likely option for heating of residential houses in the future. Building up to 1 million heat pumps installed every year from around about 2028, 2030. At the moment, getting contractors who actually know how to design and install systems properly is quite difficult. There's been many examples of poorly designed systems which don't work very efficiently. And whilst on the face of it, it shouldn't be any more expensive to install a heat pump than install a gas boiler. People are often charging 2 or 3 times as much in terms of installation prices. The main thing about heat pumps is that they operate efficiently on radiator systems when the radiators are actually designed to operate at no more than 45 degrees centigrade. That's compared with a normal boiler, which might operate at, say, around 70 degrees centigrade on the radiators. So generally, what you need to do to make that work is either insulate your house a lot more so that the existing radiators can work at that lower temperature, or increase the size of the radiators. More panels exist at the moment, or even triple panels where you've got double panels, or possibly doing a bit of both. I mean, one thing you can look at, actually, if you're thinking about a heat pump, is most modern boilers have actually got a display of the actual water temperature that the water's going out from the boiler on. And you can try reducing that to a point where you can still keep warm in your house at a much lower temperature. Now, I've tried that recently, and I can operate my boiler at about 50, 55 degrees. So I know that I need to do a bit more insulation and possibly increase the radiators a bit more in order to get that down to a sort of 45-degree temperature on it. Heat pumps make a bit of noise, not much. So you install them on outside walls. Generally, you wouldn't install them directly underneath a bedroom window or directly facing your neighbour's bedroom window. But generally, the noise isn't, is a manageable sort of issue. Another thing that you need to remember is that with heat pumps, you need a hot water cylinder. A lot of us have probably had our hot water cylinders discarded by having these combination gas boilers. So you need to find a place to put that. Ground source heat pumps are more efficient than air source. But they cost a lot more. You get a bigger subsidy under the renewable heat incentive, but you actually need a lot of outside space. You have the option of either fitting sort of coils about 1 meter underneath your lawn, if you've got a very big lawn. Another option is actually to drill holes in the ground, what they call a vertical borehole collector. And that would require actually having a vertical borehole drilling machine come into your garden for that to work. So it's probably an outside option for most residential properties within the inner city and in Headingley. But I mentioned there are some big houses with the space for that, and it would be a very efficient way of making things work. Okay, briefly, a few other options that might happen now and in the future. Leeds got its district heating system running off the very attractive, very beautiful waste disposal incinerator out in Cross Green. And it's putting in these insulated underground pipes through to council flats up in Lincoln Green and to down the hedgerow to the town hall and such like. I mean, the pipes go past a load of poorly insulated terraced housing in Cross Green area where there's a lot of people in fuel poverty, but unfortunately they've decided not to connect those up to that system. So district heating has a place, certainly things like blocks of flats, smaller systems than the Leeds one, perhaps, where you have perhaps one individual large heat pump providing heat to a whole block of flats. Installing them is very expensive, and again, it doesn't seem to be so much on the headline of the government's strategy for heating for the future. But I think, there is a place certainly for local community heating systems run off proper renewable systems like heat pumps. Whether heat from burning waste, including all our plastic and other waste that we should actually be minimizing, can be treated as a sort of a low carbon solution, is perhaps a matter for debate. But given it's there, and given there's sort of 20 megawatts of heat coming out of the place, then at least you might as well use it. There's some companies, such as the Northern Gas Networks, who are proposing the idea of a hydrogen gas grid system. Now, I'm in danger of talking about hydrogen. I could talk about that for a long, long time. It's quite a controversial issue. The system that Northern Gas Grid are proposing is one that actually still extracts natural gas from the ground. It uses energy to take the carbon dioxide out of the natural gas to create hydrogen, and then the intention is that it would bury that carbon dioxide somewhere where you hopefully it won't come out for a long, long time. It's a very expensive solution, and it's not a totally green solution. It uses what's called blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen is the idea that hydrogen you can get by actually extracting hydrogen from water using electrolysis. And that's, if you're using electricity to do that from a renewable source, then that's a proper low carbon solution. However, it's so inefficient that if you went onto a hydrogen gas grid rather than, say, using air source heat pumps, you would need 4 times as much wind energy generation to do that, because it's such an inefficient system. So it seems like, I think, whilst there's a lot of sort of large companies in keeping a gas network, such as Northern Gas Network, company owned by a Hong Kong billionaire, it may not be the best solution for zero carbon in the future. I'm putting this in because I think people should be wary of just going out and buying a gas boiler, thinking that in a few years' time they can just click a switch and it'll convert to hydrogen. There's all sorts of issues around the fact that you need to replace all your gas pipework in your house because hydrogen is such a leak-prone gas anyway. So I think that's the main point I want to make, is that both the climate change committees who advise the government and a lot of other people are casting doubt on the idea that this is actually a realistic option for the future. It's a very expensive option as well. Hydrogen will probably be used for things like industry, very useful for that, for marine and aviation transport, which was also mentioned today by the Climate Change Committee as being the main sources use of hydrogen, green hydrogen in the future. Wood stoves, there's a lot of debate about wood stoves, and I think one thing you could say is that if everybody in Headingley had a wood stove, then we would be days when we would be suffering from quite a nasty smog around Headingley. However, if you look at the air quality monitor in Headingley, which is just outside the Original Oak pub and is available online, it was noticeable that the harmful particulates monitor dropped radically when traffic reduced in April. and there's only slightly started climbing back up again now that traffic has increased. So I don't think the wood stoves that do exist in Headingley have any impact on that at the moment. If you do have a stove, you can at least do things like buy yourself a moisture monitor, make sure you're burning dry logs. You can use, make sure that you've got an efficient stove, and that will minimize the amount of smoke that comes off it. And finally, last slide, the Green Homes Grant was introduced only a few months ago. And originally the idea was that all the money had to be spent by next March 2021. So on the face of it, it seemed like a really good thing that anyone, including private house owners, can get up to £5,000 for insulation and heating improvements. And it's not means tested, you don't have to be on benefits for this. You can also get money towards some of the things that Andy was mentioning, like wall and floor insulation. If you do that, you can also get add on things like secondary glazing or double glazing onto that as well. The grant to say is up to £5,000. It includes heat pumps and solar thermal installations, but there's a catch 22 on the heat pump money. Is that if you get a grant, say of £2,000 towards an air source heat pump installation, they will then reduce that money, take that money away again from the renewable heat incentives that you would get otherwise. So that's a slightly mean trick by the government of giving with one hand and taking away with the other. The big problem at the moment is that the contractors who are accredited for the system have to be what they call landmark accredited. And there just aren't enough of them with the skills to carry out this sort of insulation work, things like the wall insulation, such like which Andy was showing you about, floor insulation. And those that are available and accredited are finding they're being asked to do more work than they can actually fit in over the next few months, and they're tending to also then up their prices. Last week, our dear Boris agreed to extend the system to March 2022, which hopefully means that if you're interested in the system, in the whole idea, you've got a bit more time to try and find a decent contractor, and hopefully more contractors will actually get themselves accredited under the landmark scheme. That website, if you look up, if you Google simple energy advice or simple energy, it'll probably come up. And that's the government website, which goes through the scheme and also has a link to local contractors. I mean, I personally found that when I went on that and looked for contractors to do floor insulation, the ones that were listed as doing floor insulation actually were heating contractors who knew really more about gas boilers than anything else. So that's quite a big problem. Anyway, I'll stop now. I've taken longer than I should have done. So give time for questions and such like.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Matthew, and well done on finding somebody else's Wi-Fi to connect to us. So there's quite a few of us, and I'm sure lots of people have got some questions or thoughts. So I'll try, and if you can stay on mute unless you're asking one, and either put your hand up if you use the Zoom facility, if you know how to do it. If not, just stick your hand up. I can see most people, although a few of you haven't got your video on. And I'll call maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and then ask Andy and Matthew to respond. So has anybody got any, or you can also put your questions in the chat. And there's one already saying, where do we find a contractor to install air source heat pumps, from Uppy Joe. Anybody else got a question? Maybe related to heat pumps? Paul? You have to unmute.
It wasn't about heat pumps, is that all right? It was about what it was that Andy said about downloading stuff and what was being downloaded. I suppose that was it. That went by me a bit quick.
Okay, so Andy, you can put the links for downloading stuff into chat, and then everybody can see them. And there's another question for Andy, which is, why did you not talk about roof insulation? Is it more difficult or more expensive? So Matthew, where do we find a contractor to install air source heat pumps? And then Andy, what about roof insulation?
You can use that Simple Energy Advice website link to look for heat pump installers in particular. Then they also need to be what they call MSC, which is Micro Generation Scheme accredited, in order to get your renewable heat incentive grant. Some companies which produce sort of good quality air source heat pumps, such as the Mitsubishi EcoDan, do have a list of approved installers. So if you go to their websites, both say EcoDan, I think Grant heat pumps are also a good quality heat pump system. You can try and find from them recommended installers in your area.
Okay. And there's a couple for Andy. You can try and answer all of them in one after the other, if you like. So long one in chat from Jules about, is there anything easy that does about underfloor insulation that doesn't involve pulling up whole sets of boards and insulating from below? And another one about solid concrete floors. So where you go, Andy?
Okay, great questions. Here's the thing, the floors and the roof are the two best things to focus on first. If you can stop the cold air blowing in at the bottom of your house, which is obviously going to displace warm air somewhere else, and do your loft or your attic insulation, it is like putting a woolly hat on your house. So floors, if you can get underneath it, that's a really good way to get at that surface. The two things you want to do is to make it as airtight as possible. And I've described the two most important things, which is to seal between the floorboards and around the edge. And also all the places where pipes and wires are going through. The second thing is to fit insulation. And you've got choices about what you want to do. And it's more of a discussion rather than a single answer for that. Anything, I mean, in terms of how much space you need to get in, the lower it is, the slower it is. So I'll give you, for instance, if it's a walk-in cellar and you could do a job in a day because you can walk around and get at the surface, if it's low enough that you have to stoop and go in, it's going to take maybe 3 days, 2 or 3 days. If your hands and knees crawling, 5 to 7 days. If you're flat out crawling, it could be 2 weeks. And there are occasions where I have had to do the flat out crawling thing. Now, but actual fact, anything below a meter of space, it is quicker and easier to lift all the floorboards. And even though that's a piece of work to do, the result, as you've seen in the example I gave, you can get down to below 5% of heat loss with no drafts. So it is worth doing. Concrete floors are very difficult. In older properties, the chances are there's no insulation been put in them. So really, to get a good result, a good effect, you've either got to dig down to give yourself some space to put insulation in, or you have to build up with some kind of timber framework to have space for insulation. Neither of those are possible in quite a lot of houses. So the best thing you can do is to form a thermal break by having some material on the surface. You could consider rubber-backed carpet tiles as a reasonable thermal break, or you want something a little bit more sustainable, then cork tiles, which you can varnish, and they're easier to clean. Shall I go straight on to attics? Attics and roof, yes, you've got to insulate those. I was just pruning. Tony gave me this 3-line whip to reduce the length of my talks today, so I had to start chopping slides out. Insulating is all about finding spaces that you can put insulation. One of the things that hasn't been said tonight, which is really, really important, before you start jumping off and finding contractors or second guessing what it is you need, a really good starting point is to have a whole house review. And there's a few people doing these, and this is where somebody comes around to your house and has a discussion with you, looks at not only the construction style of the house, but how you use it, which rooms are important, and then help you build a priority plan of retrofit works you can do over a period of time.
Thank you, Andy. There's a question from Nikki which says, where's the best place for a cat flap? Maybe we could expand that and think about, I don't know, letterboxes and keyholes and various other things that that let air in. How important is it for that kind of draft proofing?
Yeah, am I doing these, or does Matthew want to
I don't know.
jump in?
I'm not sure where the answer to where's the best place for a cat flap is.
I know there was a debate on trying to find an internet, a sort of passive house approved cat flap, but I'm not sure if they ever came up with one.
Yes, apparently you can get them. They're incredibly expensive. I mean, the idea of having a cat flap with two flaps, so there's got some kind of, you know, airlock kind of arrangement where one shuts and before the other one opens. Yep, there we have it. No easy way. Now, you just got to wait up. I mean, a cat generates about 16 watts of energy. So, you know, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the cat heat. Is that right? Is that a proverb? No.
Yeah. So if you have a cat flap, you need at least 2, if not 3 cats.
That's right. But if you don't have a cat flap, then it's okay not to have cats.
Anybody else got any questions? You want to put your hand up? You don't have to put it in chat. Meryl, you have to come up.
Over the years, I've got a 1930s semi brick built bedroom built originally in the roof space, which led to huge problems with insulating. But I've insulated what I think every can do over the years. But of course, it's always people with vested interests that are coming and telling you what needs to be done. So I'm thinking, you know, it would be quite nice to have someone who is independent with no vested interest to actually come and check. I mean, for example, you mentioned different kinds of wall insulation. I've no idea whether I've got the best one or not. I had something done in the attic, but you know, I really feel quite ignorant and wonder whether it's possible to get an independent person to just come and look at the house and perhaps check what the insulation materials are.
Yes.
And give me an assessment.
Yes. Well, rather than me answer that, I'm just going to throw that open to the assembled honourable people in the room to see if anybody would like to suggest somebody that they know who could do this kind of work.
Hoppy Joe.
Yes, well, actually, I had a chap called Andy Walker come and do it for us.
Really?
And he did an excellent job.
Other walkers are available. Yeah.
Yes. Anyone else like to comment on this? Oh, there's a
Jim.
Yeah, Andy gets my vote as well. He would have been up to his knees or eyes in insulation in March if our plan had gone ahead, but COVID intervened. So we're just waiting to the new year now to set him loose.
In the past, I've on a different house, the one I live
Yeah.
in now, I've had an architect who was very helpful at looking and seeing what kind of insulation there was there, and had some kind of, can't remember what it was, a thermal, was it a camera or a something
Infrared.
that measured the amount of heat that was, Matthew will probably tell me.
Infrared camera.
Infrared camera. So if you know a friendly architect or one who won't charge you very much, then that might be a route to go. Any other thoughts? Oh, sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a third yes to Andy. Yes, Andy's crawled under my floor and given me lots of good ideas. My floor is a sort of, well, it's under a meter anyway, so it's definitely a crawling on your stomach job. So thank you, Andy, and a lot of good ideas about sealing up gaps and so forth, which is probably something hasn't been emphasised that much. It seems to me, I mean, this is what Andy said to me, and it seems like really good sense that probably the first thing to do is to try and stop the gaps, stop the drafts. If there's like holes in your floorboards, and builders are just so sloppy, they just want to get the job done and get out. As Andy was suggesting in his pictures, there's always holes all over the place in these old houses that have had, you know, central heating systems and bits of work done to them over the years. Ordinary builders make a terrible mess. What was the other thing I was going to say? Can't remember now. Oh yes, it was a question just sparked off about the infrared. I just wondered how useful you think something smart. Obviously, it's expensive gear, but I wondered if it's something that could be bought or hired or borrowed, even on a sort of community ownership basis. How useful is something like an infrared camera at spotting the most offending bits in a house, i.e., you know, just a shot of your own house and seeing how much is flowing out through the windows and doors and roof? Is that possible, sensible?
Matthew, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think infrared cameras are very useful, but you need to know how to use them, and you need to know, you know, what to trust and what to ignore in terms of the images that you get from them.
Right.
But yeah, we've sometimes employed experts, infrared people who, you know, to do reports who actually know exactly what they're doing. But I think it's an interesting idea, and I think for, you know, certain things like checking how good if you think you've got cavity wall insulation, or you've been told it's been installed at some point previously, using an infrared camera at the right time of day and with the right temperatures would at least show you whether there's, you know, an even amount of insulation or whether it's uneven in the walls and any sort of serious gaps in it, which would be quite useful. And I think, yeah, just following on, Mike, honestly, you know, it'd be nice if we could get more sort of, you know, community involvement or community organisation around, you know, getting people with knowledge to actually come around to houses and you know, help with priorities. I mean, Andy's obviously one person, and is hoping to get more people on board. If we can get someone in Headingley to, you know, prepared to do that sort of work reasonably, yeah, without charging too much, that would be really useful.
Andy?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that there really aren't many people, and it's absolutely true that if a double glazing salesman comes round, then they'll try and sell you double glazing. I think it's just only fair to give people impartial advice. I mean, there are things that I can quote for: underfloor insulation, wall insulation, room and roof and loft insulation. But if you don't need it, I'll tell you don't need it. Or rather, I'll tell you what you do need as a priority, because that's important. That's what I do. Now, I do quite a bit of work with community groups across the region, Ilkley, Harrogate, York, and so on. And what some of them have started doing is coming with me and shadowing this creation of whole house plans. And I'd be entirely happy for somebody, one or two people, let's say from Zero Carbon Headingley, to come and learn how to do it, because I'm really keen to pass on this information. I'm never going to be out of work, so I'd really like other people to be involved in doing this stuff.
That's excellent, and we'll definitely talk about that at our next meeting. And just to plug, if anybody is not already a member of Zero Carbon Headingley, please please join us and contribute your thoughts and ideas as well. Anybody got any more questions for Matthew?
I do see there's another question come in about, can floorboards be filled from above rather than below?
All right.
Potentially, yes. The thing you've got to be aware that it's very showy if it's from above, particularly if it's going to be stripped boards, and if you're going to want to varnish it or paint it, you're going to need to use an acrylic filler, which can be overpainted, and not choose a silicone based sealant, which can't be painted. The other biggest gap, though, in a floor is around the edge, and often this isn't accessible from above because it's hidden by the skirting board. So it's unlikely to be as effective as getting underneath.
Jill? And it's an obvious one that on the draft proofing is that a lot of the older houses in Headingley have got open fireplaces. And if you've got a chimney which isn't blocked up, well, got some sort of sealed stove in front of it, that can extract a huge amount of warm air from your house. You can get to blow up pillows and things like that that are specially designed to go up into the chimney to block the chimneys off. Which are hidden then. And if you decide you want to burn a few logs at Christmas, you just take the pillow out.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah.
Just to emphasise the issue on draft proofing, I run a programme called Carbon Conversations, and in the session on sort of home energy, when I first went on to learn how to run the programme, which was about 12 years ago, the trainer running it said, so I'll tell you the best 3 things to do first in your house. What are they? And nobody could guess them all. So he said, I'll tell you the best 3 things are draft proofing, and draft proofing. And then the next 3 best things are insulation, insulation, and insulation. So I've never forgotten that one. Jill, you wanted a question?
Yeah, it was just a quick one on floorboards still. Thanks, Andy, who also has recently done a survey for us, and having now insulated all our pipes in the cellar, the floorboards, I think, are tongue and groove. Do they still need sealing? It doesn't look as if there's any gap that any air could come through.
Yes, absolutely. They need sealing. The timber shrinks over time, and you know how little of a gap that you need around a front door for the cold wind whistling off the North York moors to get into our buildings. I had a house in Otley. It had a strip pine floor. I actually had some mineral wool underneath it. But when it was windy, the rug on the floor took off like a flying carpet. So even though it looked tight, there was sufficient airflow going through it. So yes, it's a really, really important thing to do. It's actually very quick as well. I mean, if you're doing it from underneath, I use bathroom silicone sealant, and just on my own, I can do maybe 6 to 8 square meters an hour. So it's not that bad a job. It doesn't have to look too tidy because it's going to be, underneath the floor and hopefully hidden by mineral wool.
Thank you. Okay, any last questions anybody got? Meryl and then Paul.
Right, I'm heard hopefully now. I keep on being quite worried when I'm hearing the government talk about the fact that gas boilers are going to get banned. Have you any concept of what the time scale? I know that's an impossible question, but are they going to ban them? I can see they might ban new ones going into houses, but if you've got one already, is it likely? They're talking about 10 years' time, aren't they? likely we're all going to have to get rid of our gas boilers when they put this ban on in, you know, and I think 2030 is the date they're talking about.
There's going to be a ban on installing gas boilers in new builds.
As a new building, so there won't be insisted on everyone else changing them instantly at the same time.
No, absolutely not.
Oh.
I mean, the idea is that there would be a phase, you know, a phase changeover to heat pumps or district heating or whatever, you know, over a 15-year period.
Right.
So that, yeah, hopefully by we get to sort of 2040 at least, then we won't be using natural gas as a heating source at all.
Right, thank you.
Okay, cool.
The gas boiler police are going to come around knocking on your door. They're going to have vans like TV detection to see if you've got a see if you've got a boiler running. Yeah.
All I was going to say was the so you know you've done a recording, Tony, yeah?
Yeah.
And that's going to go on the Zero Carbon Headingley website, will it?
We'll try, yes, hopefully.
There'll be a link to it, yeah.
Okay, link to it. Okay, that's good. Okay, so we know where to look.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everybody as well.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you especially Andy and Matthew for two really interesting presentations. You've got some links in the chat, so I'll just leave that for a couple of minutes, and we'll repeat them. We'll put them on Zero Carbon Headingley website. It's a page on Headingley Development Trust. Anyway, I'm sure you've all got emails. You can contact us if you want to find out more. And hope you have a nice, warm, draft-free evening the rest of tonight. And if you want to come off mute for a second, and we can all give Andy and Matthew a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Cheers.